The autumn rain had been falling in Asheville all morning, painting the streets in a silver sheen that reflected the low, heavy clouds. I sat in my truck, engine off, parked across from the cafe on Broadway Street. From here, I had the perfect view of the corner table, the one I knew Camille always chose when she met her. I watched the hands of my watch crawl toward noon, my breath slow and steady, my chest tight with a mix of anger and anticipation. This was the day. The day I'd stop pretending I didn't know. The day I'd watch her world shatter exactly the way she'd tried to shatter mine. 3 months earlier, if someone had told me my wife, the woman I'd built a life with for 11 years, was sneaking around with her childhood friend, I would have laughed it off. Camille and Lila had known each other since middle school. Leila had been in our wedding photos, smiling wide, holding Camille's bouquet when she needed to adjust her dress. They had an easy, almost sisterly bond. Or so I thought. It started small. Camille became more protective of her phone. She started working late at the design studio more often. When I'd ask what she and Lila had been chatting about, she'd smile and say, "Oh, nothing important, just girl stuff." But her eyes never met mine when she said it. Most men would have confronted her right then. I didn't. I've never been the type to swing wildly when I could take careful aim. I started watching. Not in a paranoid frenzy, just methodically. First, I checked her phone when she showered. At first, there was nothing. Just the same group texts, Pinterest boards, and harmless memes. Then I noticed a new app, Signal. Private messages, auto-deleting after a set time. My stomach tightened when I saw the contact name, Ava. Camille didn't have any friends named Ava. 2 days later, I intercepted her laptop while she was in the kitchen making coffee. The Signal account was open. Ava was Lila. My hands trembled as I read the messages. They weren't just emotional. They were intimate, almost poetic. The kind of words I used to get from Camille when we first started dating. And some of them were far from innocent. I didn't tell her I knew. Instead, I started a clock in my head. Every move she made, every alibi, every subtle change in her schedule, I logged it. I knew where she was going before she did. I learned that Tuesdays were her days. Tuesdays, Camille and Lila met at the same cafe, same time, same corner table. So I waited. I crafted my plan with the kind of patience you only get from someone who's been burned before and refused to play the fool twice. Which is how I ended up here, in my truck, watching the rain bead on the windshield, waiting for the moment Camille walked in. At 12:03, I saw her, my wife, stepping out of her car in her favorite camel-colored coat, hair pulled into a loose bun, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. Not at me, of course, but for her. And right then, as she crossed the street, I felt nothing but cold clarity. Today she wouldn't see me coming. Before Camille, I'd never been married. I dated, sure. But she was the first woman who made me think about the long game. We met in a bookstore downtown, both reaching for the same old copy of The Great Gatsby. She laughed. I made some corny comment about fate, and 6 months later, we were engaged. Asheville became our little nest. Quiet streets, good coffee, mountains in the distance. I thought we were the kind of couple people envied. But looking back, the cracks started earlier than I wanted to admit. Lila had always been in the picture, orbiting around Camille's life like a second moon. She lived 2 neighborhoods over, worked in freelance photography, and was always just dropping by. I liked her well enough. She was charming, funny, and could talk to anyone. But she had this way of looking at Camille that I ignored for years. A softness in her eyes, a little too much lingering when they hugged. It wasn't until last winter that I began to notice the changes. Camille started guarding her phone like it was an extension of her hand. When I'd walk into a room, she'd tilt the screen away. Her laugh, that warm, easy laugh, became something I heard less at home and more muffled behind closed doors when she was on a call. One night, she came home late, cheeks flushed, hair wind-tossed. I asked if she'd been with Lila, and she said yes. They'd just gone for drinks. I wanted to believe her. I told myself I was overthinking, that I'd become one of those insecure husbands who sees ghosts in the dark. Then, in March, she started working late every Tuesday. Same day, every week. That's when I started keeping notes. It began simple, jotting times, places, and excuses in my phone. But the more I logged, the clearer the pattern became. Her Tuesday shifts were always short on actual work hours, and the end point was always the same cafe on Broadway Street. I tested her once, told her I might swing by the studio to take her to dinner. She panicked, said she was too slammed and would rather go straight home. That night, she didn't get home until 10 p.m., smelling faintly of vanilla and wine. By April, my doubt had solidified into certainty. That's when I found signal on her laptop. I'll never forget the rush in my ears as I read those messages, not just flirtations, but confessions, memories they shared, things they wanted to do together, a secret world they'd been building behind my back. And that's when my plan shifted. I wasn't going to shout or cry or beg for an explanation. I was going to show her I knew, in my own time, in my own way. Which brings me back to that rainy Tuesday. I'd been sitting in my truck for 20 minutes, watching the cafe's door swing open and closed, waiting for the two of them to sit down together. And as much as the rage burned in me, I felt something colder, sharper, the satisfaction of knowing that in a few minutes, I would own the truth completely. That Tuesday, the rain came down in thin silver lines, streaking across the windshield as I sat parked half a block from the cafe. Asheville streets were quiet, just the occasional car splashing through the puddles. I kept my engine running low, my fingers tapping on the steering wheel, not from nerves, but from anticipation. At 6:07 p.m., I saw her. Camille stepped out of her car, pulling her coat tighter around her. Even from here, I could tell she had put in the extra effort. Her hair styled just the way she knew I liked, lips painted a shade darker than usual. She glanced around, not in a paranoid way, but the way someone does when they're looking forward to seeing someone they shouldn't. A minute later, Lila arrived. She didn't even bother to hide the smile that spread across her face when she spotted Camille. They hugged, too close, too long, the kind of embrace that's heavy with history and intent. I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't move. This wasn't the moment to storm in. This was the moment to watch, to gather. They went inside, and I gave them 5 minutes before I followed. I wanted them settled, comfortable. I wanted the conversation flowing. Inside, the cafe was warm and dimly lit, smelling of espresso and rain-soaked coats. I spotted them instantly, a corner table by the window, their heads leaned close over 2 mugs. Camille's hand was on Lila's forearm, her eyes bright in that way I hadn't seen directed at me in months. I approached slowly, keeping my expression casual, almost cheerful. The trick here wasn't confrontation, it was surprise. "Camille? Lila? Fancy seeing you two here?" I said, my voice light. Camille's head jerked up, and for a split second pure panic flickered in her eyes. But she recovered fast, forcing a smile. "Oh, hey, I didn't know you'd be around this part of town." I glanced at Lila, who seemed less skilled at masking her shock. "Yeah," I replied, pulling out a chair without asking. "Had some free time, thought I'd grab a coffee. Mind if I join?" They exchanged a quick look, the kind of silent conversation that screams, "We weren't expecting this." Camille laughed a little too brightly. "Of course, sit down." As I settled in, I could feel the tension humming under the table. They tried to keep the talk light, work, weekend plans, the weather, but there were pauses, glances, stilted laughter. I played along, sipping my coffee, asking small questions. But each time Camille spoke, I leaned in, studying her face. Not to make her nervous, but to remind her, subtly, deliberately, that I was right there, in the space she thought was hers to hide. This wasn't the reveal. Not yet. This was the seed planting stage. And judging by the way she kept tucking her hair behind her ear and shifting in her seat, it was already taking root. 2 nights later, I suggested we have dinner at home. Nothing special, just pasta and a bottle of wine. Camille seemed relieved, or maybe just distracted, as she chopped vegetables at the counter. I leaned against the doorway, watching her work like I had 1,000 times before. But this time, I wasn't just watching. I was measuring every word, every movement. "So," I said casually, "ran into Lila the other night." Funny coincidence. She froze for the briefest moment, knife hovering over the cutting board, before resuming with forced ease. "Oh? Yeah, we bumped into each other too. Totally random." I let a small smile tug at my lips. "Yeah, totally." I didn't push, not yet. Instead, I told her about some imaginary plans I had for the weekend. A fake work trip out of town. She nodded, trying too hard to seem nonchalant. But I could see the flicker of calculation in her eyes. She was already thinking about how she could use that time. That was the point. I wanted her comfortable enough to step right into the trap. Over the next couple of days, I dropped hints. Small, almost careless remarks about trust, about how lucky we were to have no secrets. Each time she'd smile a little too quickly or change the subject. On Friday morning, I kissed her goodbye and told her I'd be leaving for the trip that evening. In reality, I drove just far enough to make her believe I was gone, then doubled back, parking my car 2 blocks away from the house. The hours crawled. My phone buzzed a few times, texts from her, light and cheerful, telling me to drive safe. I replied just as warmly. At 8:17 p.m., I saw headlights in our driveway. A familiar car. Lila's car. Through the blinds, I caught a glimpse of them in the living room. Laughter, a wine bottle, and the unmistakable body language of people who weren't just catching up. My heart pounded, but I didn't barge in. Not yet. I wanted the moment to be undeniable, unforgettable. I slipped my phone into my pocket, hit record on the small voice-activated device I'd planted under the couch earlier that week, and waited for the final piece of proof. This wasn't just about catching them. It was about making sure there was no way back for her. No excuses. No, it wasn't what it looked like. By the time I finally walked through the door, the air inside was thick with the smell of wine and betrayal. And Camille, she looked like she'd just seen a ghost. I stepped inside without a word, closing the door behind me with a quiet click. Camille's smile froze halfway, her glass of wine trembling slightly in her hand. Lila's eyes darted to the hallway, like she was considering a quick escape. But she stayed seated, maybe too shocked to move. "Didn't expect me back so soon?" I asked, my voice calm, almost conversational. Camille's lips parted, but nothing came out. She set her glass down on the coffee table, the faint clink sounding louder than it should have. "You told me you were going out of town," she finally managed. I tilted my head, studying her. Yeah, that was the plan, until I remembered I left something important here. Lila shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe I should—" "No," I cut her off without raising my voice. "You should stay. You're part of this too." Camille's hands fidgeted in her lap. "This isn't what you think." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. A few taps, and the living room filled with the muffled sound of their earlier conversation. The device under the couch had done its job perfectly. Their laughter, their flirtation, Camille's whispered words, all of it was there. Camille's face drained of color. Lila looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "See," I continued, my voice still even. "I didn't just happen to catch you tonight. I've known for weeks. I gave you the chance to tell me yourself. You didn't. So now, we're doing it my way." Her eyes shimmered with tears, but I didn't flinch. Every detail of this moment was etched into my mind. Her guilt, her fear, her realization that I'd been 3 steps ahead the whole time. "You always said you hated games," I said, stepping closer. "But you were playing one all along. The only difference is, I play better." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. And I wasn't done yet. I stood there, letting the weight of the moment crush the air in the room. Camille's mascara was already smudging. Lila stared at her hands, like they could somehow explain her choices. I walked to the bookshelf in the corner, pulled out a plain manila envelope, and tossed it onto the coffee table. Camille looked at it, then at me. "What's this?" "Everything," I said. "Printouts of your messages, hotel receipts, photos, enough to make sure you never get to twist the truth." Her hands trembled as she reached for it, but I stopped her. "Don't bother. That copy's for my lawyer." Her lip quivered. "Please, can we just talk about this? You don't have to—" I cut her off with a quiet, steady voice. "You had months to talk, Camille. You had years, to be honest. Now, I'm done listening." I turned to Lila. "And you? You've known me since we were kids. You sat at my family's table. You held my mother's hand at her funeral. And still—" I shook my head slowly, the disgust heavy in my chest. "You'll have to live with that." No one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I reached into my jacket and placed a single house key on the table. "This is the only thing you'll get from me. The rest stays." Camille's eyes went wide. "Where will you go?" I allowed myself a small, humorless smile. "Somewhere you can't follow." With that, I walked out the front door, the cool night air hitting my face like a rush of clarity. Each step down the porch felt lighter, each breath easier. I didn't look back, not once, because I knew the real revenge wasn't the evidence or the confrontation or even the silence I'd leave behind. It was the knowledge that for the rest of her life, she'd remember this night and the man who refused to be broken by her betrayal. And before we part ways here, I want to say something to you, my listeners. I know who you are. Most of you are close to my age, and you'll understand. I'm a retired radio announcer. I live alone now. No wife, no children. This channel is my little corner of the world where I feel connected. When you watch without subscribing, it feels like I'm walking this road alone again. So, if my stories mean something to you, subscribe, so we can keep walking it together.